Apple posted its first annual revenue decline in 15 years, but projected a return to growth behind strong iPhone 7 sales. Read the Wall Street Journal after Apple released earnings last week. How big of a deal is this decline in revenue, and how much hope should Apple investors place in iPhone 7? Mark Hibben and I discuss this and everything else Apple on today's show. Welcome to Invest in the Family Radio, a podcast about learning to invest. My name is Brian Bain, and I'm your host. At Investor in the Family Radio, we believe that every dollar and minute we spend is an investment in something, and together, we want to make the best investments that we can, so thank you so much for joining us. Remember, our goal here is to help you learn to invest financially and in all of life. You can always find more at investorinthefamily.com and subscribe to the podcast at iTunes, Stitcher, and the Google Play Store. And if you would like the next best thing to a transcript of this episode, my personal notes taken by me during the interview can be yours. And if you want these notes, simply text the word family notes, that's one word, family notes, to the number 44222, or visit investorinthefamily.com and sign up, and we'll be sure to get you taken care of. Do you like shopping for insurance? Of course you don't. It can be a terrible experience, especially when it comes to life insurance. If you have loved ones that you want to take care of financially after you're gone, then you may want to consider term life insurance, and Policy Genius is the easiest way to get insurance, period. At Policy Genius, you can figure out what you need, compare the top policies, get covered, and save. If you want to save on term life insurance, go to investorinthefamily.com/policygenius. That's investorinthefamily.com/policygenius for access created specifically for Investor in the Family listeners. I do get a small commission if you use my link, which costs you nothing. It's a win-win. Visit investorinthefamily.com/policygenius for more info and have the most enjoyable insurance shopping experience you've ever had. And I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Mark Hibben. Well, hey, Mark, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back.
Well, always a fun time when you have you here with us. And obviously, just recently we had Apple reporting earnings, and so there should be plenty to talk about regarding Apple today. Can you give us a down low on some big highlights from the earnings report?
Well, the big highlight was the guidance for the fiscal 2017 Q1, which is the December quarter. And that's always Apple's biggest quarter because it's holiday season in a lot of parts of the world. They sell more products and more iPhones on that quarter than any other time. And the guidance was kind of light. I mean, it was 0 to 2.8%, which is not terribly impressive. I tried very hard not to sound too down in my article that came out today. But, you know, it was worse than last year. Last year was 1 to 4%.
This is fourth quarter guidance, correct?
Yeah. Okay. Well, calendar fourth quarter, fiscal first quarter for Apple.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. December quarter.
Right.
And that was a little disappointing because I really thought that, you know, based on what I was seeing with iPhone 7, that they were really going to have a very, very strong quarter. And why aren't they having a strong quarter became the, you know, for the December quarter became the main topic of conversation with the analysts during the earnings conference call. The September quarter basically turned out the way everyone thought it would. And, you know, there isn't much to talk about there. The release of iPhone 7 a week early did help. But it was still a down quarter. They were still, you know, down year over year in terms of revenue and operating income.
Yeah, and I'm reading here that's apparently the first time in 15 years. So people are making a little bit of a big deal out of that too.
Well, yeah, I mean, fiscal 2016.
But the news is.
Well, I think fiscal 2016 was going to be a down year, and I made that point, and everyone was expecting that. I don't know how much to really make of that. I don't buy into the peak iPhone concept. I don't believe that. A while back, I wrote an article saying, well, you know, if you look at just Mac unit sales since the early days, since the 1980s. You really can't make a case that Apple has even experienced peak Mac yet. So, but there have been periodic downturns, and there have been times in the history of Mac sales that you could look, if you look narrowly at that limited time frame, you could say, oh yeah, this is peak Mac because there's a hump there. But in the longer term view, it hasn't held up. And I believe that's going to be the case with iPhone.
Well, tell me this. Why was fiscal 2016 expected to be a down year?
Oh, because of iPhone 6s not really being as strong a seller as in the previous year,
Gotcha.
Which was iPhone 6, which was a huge hit and which had a lot of momentum that carried on into calendar 2015. In fact, it carried all the way up to the end of Apple's fiscal year. It was pretty amazing. So no one really expected that to recur. Now the question is Apple going to resume growth? And that's why there was so much focus on the earnings guidance for the December quarter. And I think there were two reasons. Apple really only kind of focused on one reason, but I think there were really two for why they were kind of light on the guidance. And the reason that Apple kind of conceded, well, they gave a lot of reasons, and I people really want to go through the entire litany of excuses that they offered in the conference call. Listen to the conference call.
Right, exactly.
Luca Maestri goes through the whole thing. But I think the main thing they pointed to was just the fact that they were going to be constrained in terms of availability on certain models of iPhone 7, and that was really the big thing.
Is that unusual?
There were
Is that unusual?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you have a new iPhone coming out, it's typical to have constraints, right?
Oh yeah.
And, so that's not unusual.
In fact, iPhone 6 was very constrained in the December quarter, and there was a lot of pent-up demand that was unfulfilled and which carried over and which actually helped in the following year. I don't think really that it's a good.
So why would that be different this year?
Well, in some ways it isn't different. In some ways it is. I think the main thing was that Apple didn't anticipate the demand that there would be for the 7 Plus.
Gotcha.
That's turned out to be a much larger percentage of sales than for the previous two generations, 6 and 6S, where they had that plus size option, and that was part of it. And then the jet black finish that I was we talked about earlier, and I said that's going to be really popular and that's going to be sold out all during the December quarter. Well, yeah. It is going to be sold out all during the December quarter. And then if you combine a jet black version with the 7 Plus, that's on back order. You may not be, if you order now, you may not be able to get it this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a buddy. I mean, this is with Apple. I've got a buddy who just ordered an Apple Watch and it took him a month to get it.
Sure.
He ordered it late September, early October.
Yeah. I assume he ordered a Series 2.
Yes.
Yeah, because those are like roughly 4-week back order. Yeah. So there's the supply constraint problem, and that's a problem that is that really a good excuse? Why couldn't they have anticipated better that there would be demand for the larger iPhone? What I'm seeing in the whole market is that the whole smartphone industry is just continually ratcheting up the size of the screens of the phones, and consumers are just gravitating towards larger and larger phones every year. I think Apple needs to sort of catch up with that. Right now, they're kind of behind. They actually need a larger phone than the 7 Plus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because one that doesn't blow up, of course. No kidding. Not to get off topic. I realized yesterday that I have a friend who had their Samsung 7 Note, whatever, blow up on fire.
Note 7.
No kidding. Anyway, not to get.
Oh, you actually know someone who had a phone that blew up?
Yes, he was in his car, and he said it just started burning like flames.
Oh,
it's crazy. Yeah, so it's actually legit. And not to get off topic, but that was crazy.
No. Well, that was one of the things that everybody thought would really help sales in the December quarter was the whole fiasco with Note 7. And so that was another element that kind of made the guidance kind of surprising. Now, it could be that Apple's just being really, really conservative, but
which they have a history of doing, don't they?
What was that?
Don't they have a history of being conservative with this stuff?
Last year they barely made the low end of their guidance, so they aren't necessarily trying to lowball the guidance. is kind of the takeaway there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So they gave they said, as far as whether or not they're going to resume growth or why they're down, they said there were constraints on meeting supply with iPhone. What was their other reason?
Well, the other reason was the unspoken reason, which I pointed out in my article, which was China. China is looking a lot tougher. They were down 30% year over year for the September quarter. It was sequentially more or less flat. I think it's starting to look like it's going to be sequentially flat in the December quarter as well, which would be another year over year decline in revenue. And Apple just has a lot of tough competition in China now, and the main competition is Huawei, and part of the reason why Huawei's been able to be successful is they're imitating the Apple model in very important ways. And it's not just that they're copying the appearance of iPhone, because they're actually not doing that. The way they're imitating the Apple model is the way Apple designs and builds their phones. Apple custom designs their own system on chip, which is the core of the processing in the phone. Huawei has started to do that. Huawei has their own chip design subsidiary, and so they're putting in their custom chips in their phones. They're achieving very, very high levels of quality in the phones. The phones look great. And they're also relatively less expensive than iPhone domestically in China. So Huawei has become the number one smartphone vendor in China now.
Well, and it fits the theme, too, of a number of different companies that have struggled to get into China because there is an existing similar Chinese company, and just there's the idea of, I guess, patriotism, essentially, and which I respect. You know, you've got, not to say Amazon and Alibaba are not the same company, but there's obviously one example there among others where you've just got, what if there's an equivalent here at home, I'd rather use that one.
Well, I think that is a factor, but of course, you know, the Chinese realize that the iPhone is made in China, made by a Chinese company, or at least a Taiwanese company. And so I think there's a little bit less of that sort of nationalistic impact on things.
But I guess it's where the price factor is significant, especially there.
I think you know they're just shopping value, and it's perfectly reasonable to do that. And Apple, I think the challenge for Apple is, as we were talking about before, is to make the inner goodness of the iPhone more apparent to the consumer, so that there's a stronger value proposition there for the consumer to spend the extra money that they're going to have to spend for iPhone. And I didn't, you know, I was a little dissatisfied in certain respects with what Apple did this year with iOS 10, not allowing multitasking on iPhone. I thought that was a big mistake. I think it has been a big mistake.
You know, one thing with that point, as far as making the inner goodness of the iPhone more apparent to the consumer, you know, when we talked last time, we talked about the improvement with the camera, which, you know, is significant, and people can hear that. Okay, that's meaningful. I like that. But again, what difference does it actually make? Just yesterday, I was on a Facebook group full of a lot of different entrepreneurs and people building courses and things along those lines. And someone put a post on there, and they were just like thrilled and had all these links and descriptions, and they're so excited about, because they got their new iPhone, and they realized that because of the updating on the camera, their ability to record high quality video courses with their iPhone is now a reality, because it now allows depth of field and other dynamics. And again, when you look at you listen to Apple or you look at their website, you don't see that, you know, and so it's kind of some hidden value. That was a piece of that I saw that I thought, hey, that's really cool. I never would have thought about that until someone else mentioned it.
Yeah, I think there was one thing I didn't highlight, but which kind of disturbed me, that actually SG&A actually fell year over year for the September quarter, and I thought that was was kind of surprising, because you would want them to put on kind of a marketing push for the rollout of the new iPhone.
And just to be clear, you said SG&A. Can you tell everyone?
Selling general and administrative.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where their marketing costs are booked.
Gotcha.
And and that it just seemed like the wrong time of the year and the wrong time of the season to be cutting back on your marketing expenses.
Right.
But in fact, I think the new dual camera on the iPhone 7 Plus has helped accelerate sales for the 7 Plus. I think that's been one of the factors that's been important in shifting consumer interest there.
So let's talk about. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's all right. Let's go ahead. Let's move on.
Yeah, I want to do a little forward looking with Apple here because we've mentioned this in several of our conversations before. People always want to predict the doom and demise of Apple, and so clearly the recent earnings reports. Obviously Apple will probably be over in a couple of years, and they've been a sham of a company all this time, and we've just fallen for it, stuff like
They're
that.
Just an empty shell, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's never really been anything tangible there.
Right.
So I don't buy that. I don't see any evidence from me, in my opinion, to think that innovation is dead or they're not coming up with great products. Have they come out with a new home run like the iPhone? We don't know yet. We talked about that last time. The Apple Watch still could be that home run or other similar dynamics, but it just takes time to know.
There has been there has been a lot of declarations of failure with the Apple Watch, and
really?
People are already declaring it a flop. It was declared a flop from almost the day it was released.
Well, so was the iPad too. Remember?
Yeah. I don't know if Watch is going to be the next big thing. This year they didn't go quite as far in the direction of making it a communications device as I expected them to. Apple Watch does have the ability to communicate independently via Wi-Fi, and right now Apple's only using it in one very, very particular, narrowly defined way, which is there's an SOS function where if you need to make an emergency call, like I've fallen, I can't get up, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, you can use Watch to do that, and if you don't happen to have your phone on, it can. But if you're close to a Wi-Fi base station, it'll go directly to the Wi-Fi base station.
Oh.
So it doesn't right now, even as it stands, it doesn't need to have iPhone, absolutely. But they're not exploiting that.
It's probably a battery issue, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. But they're not exploiting that very extensively, So right now, I think for this generation watch, what they're doing is they're just trying to make it a much more competitive sports watch, and that was why the addition of GPS and really good waterproofing were the important steps forward for Watch. And I think it has accelerated sales, and I think there's just lack of availability. Things are on back order, so they haven't quite caught up with demand. Hopefully we'll see some better results when we look at the December quarter earnings next January.
Well, you sound like you're maybe a little bit concerned about the future of Apple. Is that too strong of a statement?
Well, no, it isn't.
Okay.
I am concerned. I'm kind of conflicted right now. Excuse me. I definitely believe that Apple still has tremendous growth potential. I'm becoming a little bit more concerned about Apple's leadership and whether they really are savvy enough in terms of technology products and marketing to identify the growth areas and go after them aggressively. And so right now, I'd say my main concern is a leadership concern. I like Tim Cook. I think he's a great guy, and I think he's done a very good job at what he knows how to do. which is do things like supply chain management, which is where he came up in the Apple organization. I don't know if he has that sense of that ability that Steve Jobs had. Well, I'm sure he doesn't have the ability that Steve Jobs had to recognize the product that is latent in a particular technological innovation that's sitting in a lab someplace in a very, very crude state, and yet can yield with some refinement and tweaking a marvelous product. And he did that with Xerox's research in the graphic user interface and the mouse, which of course Apple didn't invent. Xerox invented it. But he was on a tour of their labs and he saw this stuff, and apparently things clicked right away. He saw that this was really the future of personal computing. Is there someone like that at Apple now? I have to believe there probably is somewhere in their massive organization, and they really need to bring someone like that up to be sort of the product honcho.
Hasn't was it Joni Ive? Hasn't he been the person people had hoped would do that?
Yeah, kinda, but I'm not sure that he's really providing that kind of leadership and guidance.
Right.
Yeah. So just to sort of summarize, I'm not too worried about the coming year because, for one thing, the year-over-year comps get a lot easier starting in 2017 because since 2016 saw a lot of revenue declines, the year-over-year comps are going to be a lot easier, and they're probably going to be able to show some growth through 2016. Now, through 2017. So does that mean that they actually are able to top the 2015 results? That's another matter altogether. I'm not convinced that they get back up to that level. But there is a concern about Apple's long-term strategy, and I don't know if you saw that brief Kramer video where he was complaining about the attitude of the analysts during the conference call and how contemptuous and disrespectful they were. He goes in a big long rant about it. He was obviously really upset. I don't think that. It's hilarious. You got to see it. But
if I was a better host, I would somehow work it into the video, like the audio, and somehow.
Right. Well, I don't think that the analysts were overtly disrespectful, but I did sense a certain smugness, and I think it's kind of understandable because all through fiscal 2016, the analysts have been saying peak iPhone and Apple is on the decline, and they're going to have decline in revenue for the first time ever practically, and then when the results came out, basically the analysts saw validation of their opinions that they've been expressing this year. So it was only natural that they were going to probe Apple's leadership about what future plans are. And of course, Cook doesn't say anything, right? Because Apple never talks about future products.
Right.
I really think that should change. What we're seeing with a lot of companies in technology is that there's a real advantage to providing sort of a long-term preview of where you're going in products. We're seeing that with AMD. We're seeing that with Tesla. We're seeing that with a lot of companies where they show products that won't come out for years, but they give people a sort of a sneak peek of what they're going to get, and they sort of whip up interest. They get the fan base galvanized behind the new products, and as a marketing technique, that really works. Mm-hmm. And Apple, by virtue of its secretiveness, can't take advantage of that.
Yeah, well, and that raises one of the questions I wanted to wrap up with is if Apple is getting criticism for their lack of innovation, not coming out with the big new thing yet, do you feel like is there someone else out there who is doing that, so maybe is Apple being unfairly criticized because they've been that person historically, but maybe there just isn't that new tech out there anywhere yet. Does that make sense? Is there another company who's kind of trying to take their place?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, where's the supposed innovation? Well, I mean, is it like the Pixel phone? I mean, I've looked at the Pixel phone. It's a nice phone, but it's not startling. It's not startling in its innovation. I mean, it's a pretty standard run of the mill phone. It's a nice phone, but it's not a breakthrough. Microsoft is having a sort of a product rollout today. I've got to take a look at that at some point. It looks like there could be some interesting things there, but once again, I don't expect incredible technology breakthroughs. But there are areas that people are already sort of focusing on and are interested in that Apple just doesn't seem to have any presence in. For instance, augmented reality, virtual reality. What does Apple have? Nothing. Nada, zero.
Right.
Microsoft has HoloLens. HoloLens is actually very, very intriguing from a technological standpoint. I still don't know if it's ever going to make a really great product, but for me as an optical scientist, it's just an amazing device. So there is technological innovation going on that Apple doesn't seem to be engaged with, and that is a little distressing. But once again, it's part of this whole secrecy thing that I think they need to sort of lighten up on.
Well, especially since they've hinted at different things over the last several years amidst their secrecy and then never delivered, and that doesn't help either. One thing on the augmented reality that is interesting is I did an interview with one of the tech editors from Kiplinger Letter a few weeks ago, and we specifically spoke about augmented and virtual reality, and I asked him, what's it going to look like as far as this stuff really going mainstream? Like, when do you think that'll happen? And he said, augmented virtual reality will go mainstream in the U.S. when Apple builds their iPhone around AR and VR, which I thought was really interesting, because he said I think he made it sound like Samsung is doing that, and since iPhone is one of the major smartphone providers in the U.S., once Apple makes it a thing, then it'll become a big deal. I thought that was really interesting. That may not happen, but
well, Samsung has the Gear VR, which uses a Samsung smartphone as the display screen, and it just sort of clips into a pair of goggles for virtual reality. It's sort of considered the sort of low cost way to do VR. It doesn't work quite as well as the PC driven systems, but then you don't have to have a big umbilical cable streaming out of the back of your head either. So that's something to recommend it. Yeah, there are so many different directions right now in VR. We could probably have a whole we
can save that for now. Yeah, but I thought that was an interesting tie-in, given where it seems frustrating that they're not doing something, but who knows? Well, hey, Mark.
Well, they are doing something. I mean, I'm sure that they are, but once again, we have no visibility into it.
Absolutely right. Well, hey, Mark, thanks for coming to the show. Always great to have you with us.
All right, great. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed the interview today with Mark Hibben. Remember, you can get show notes with links and other details at investorinthefamily.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast at iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Play Store. And if you want to receive my summary sheet highlights, basically my notes from this interview, simply text the word family notes, one word family notes, to number 44222, or visit investorinthefamily.com and sign up, and we'll be sure to get you taken care of. This is Brian, and thanks for joining the family. The information and opinions contained on this podcast are for educational purposes only. The information does not consider the economic status or risk profile of any specific person. The information and opinions expressed should not be construed as investment trading advice and does not constitute an offer or an invitation to make an offer to buy and sell securities.